Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's dive into the top stories this hour. Hamas says it will coordinate with the Red Cross to deliver aid to Israeli hostages in Gaza. This is provided Israel meets conditions such as opening humanitarian corridors and halting airstrikes during aid distribution. The offer comes after a video of an emaciated captive sparked criticism among global leaders. A boat capsizes off Yemen's coast, killing 68 African migrants and leaving 74 missing. The vessel, carrying 154 Ethiopians, sinks in the Gulf of Aden, and only 12 survive, with hundreds fleeing conflict and poverty in search of a better life. President Donald Trump defends his firing of his BLS commissioner amid criticism that it could undermine confidence in US economic data. Trump says he will appoint a new BLS commissioner soon, with critics calling for a congressional investigation. 4 people die and almost 6,000 evacuate in southern Taiwan after record-breaking rains cause widespread landslides and flooding. 3 people go missing and 77 others suffer injuries as the southwesterly airstreams continue to affect the region. US President Donald Trump confirms that Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will visit Russia next week amid escalating tensions and a sanctions deadline. Trump also states that 2 nuclear submarines are deployed to the region ahead of the US's sanctions decision on Russia. South Korean authorities begin removing loudspeakers blaring anti-North Korea broadcasts along the border as President Lee Jae-myung's government seeks to ease tensions with Pyongyang. The move follows the cessation of propaganda broadcasts earlier in June to revive dialogue. US President Donald Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney expect to talk in the coming days after the US imposes a 35% tariff on goods not covered by the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Canadian officials remain hopeful a deal to lower tariffs is still possible. Supporters of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro protest in several cities against Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes and President Lula. The protesters demand amnesty for those involved in the alleged coup attempt after Lula's January 2023 inauguration. Now we start with the defining crisis in the Middle East, where Hamas has stated that Israeli hostages in Gaza will not receive any special privileges in food or aid, saying they are fed the same rations as Hamas fighters and the Gazan public. In a new statement, the Al-Qassam Brigade say they are not intentionally starving hostages, but insisted that any Red Cross aid will only be allowed if humanitarian corridors into Gaza are opened. The group added that they are willing to cooperate with the International Committee of the Red Cross, but only on the condition that food and medicine also reach Gaza's civilian population. The response came after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu requested Red Cross involvement in delivering food and medical aid to hostages. This follows the release of videos showing 2 hostages in weakened condition. European Union and other world leaders have slammed Hamas as well. The Israeli Prime Minister has also levied harsh accusations on the terror group. Let's listen in to Netanyahu's comments.
אזרחי ישראל היקרים, כמוכם גם אני הזדעזעתי אתמול. ראיתי את סרטוני הזוועה של הבנים היקרים שלנו, רום ואביתר. צלצלתי למשפחות, חיבקתי אותם בשמי ובשם רעייתי, גם בשמכם. תראה אותם נמקים בצינוק, אבל המפלצות של החמאס שעוטפות אותם, להם יש זרועות אבות בשר, יש להם כל מה שהם צריכים כדי לאכול. הם מריבים אותם כמו שהנאצים הריבו את היהודים.
We're now joined by Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev, who's a former Indian ambassador. He joins us live from New Delhi to discuss the ongoing Gaza crisis along with other updates around the world. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sachdev, for joining us on the programme. Given Hamas's claim that hostages receive the same amount of aid, the amount of food as Gazans and Hamas fighters, how credible is this statement from Hamas, and how do such declarations typically serve Hamas's political objectives?
Thank you for having me. It's a complicated situation, but I could say that it's very difficult to get to know if Hamas statement that the hostages are fed the same ration as their own fighters is correct. Nobody has access to either the fighters or the Israelis held as hostages. The second question that you asked is whether it helps propaganda offensive. It certainly does. Let's remember that the context of Hamas-Israel war has stalemated. The talks are at a dead end. There are no talks anymore, no ceasefire talks, because the two positions remain far apart. And in the meanwhile, humanitarian crisis has taken very grave turn. People are dying of hunger, and they are also being killed by the Israeli security people at the food distribution sites, which are managed by a US NGO with Israeli assistance. Lately, under pressure of hostage welfare people and the international community worried about famine, Mr. Netanyahu has relented by allowing more aid from international organizations such as the Red Cross and some UN agencies, and allowing airdrop. But more would be needed on a sustained manner so that this problem can be eased and negotiations can resume.
Ambassador Sachdev, the Israeli government has come under much criticism. Obviously, we've seen protests happen in Tel Aviv and cities across Israel. They believe that the Israeli government isn't prioritizing the safety of the hostages still held in Gaza. We've obviously seen the attacks on military operations in Deir al-Bala, which is where Israeli hostages are expected to be. What has been your analysis of the Israeli government's treatment and approach to the safety of hostages?
That's a good question. I don't think there is a good answer to that. Israeli government has been at loggerheads. It insists on the three preconditions for concluding the war, and they include Hamas's dismemberment. Hamas has last week rejected the demand for disarmament and giving up weapons. It said it will do so only when Palestine as a state is created. On the other hand, there are divisions within the ruling right-wing coalition. Thirdly, the option that Mr. Netanyahu exercised to distract public opinion by attacking neighboring countries and Iran is no longer there at the moment. So the hostage situation has escalated, and Israel has tried to devise a way to somehow get to the hostages the food supplies and other essentials. But Hamas is resolute in not allowing any access to the hostages by international organizations or anyone else. And it wants Israel to declare permanent ceasefire and give a timetable for withdrawal before any of the hostages are released. That appears to be a total stalemate, even though Mr. Steve Witkoff met the hostage family members and assured them that a new plan for release of the hostages is being launched. But it remains to be seen because nothing has been outlined yet.
Ambassador Sachdev, I'm just going to ask you one last question on this topic because I'm conscious of time here. This conflict here is unique. We've seen humanitarian aid being politicized, also some say weaponized. What are the risks of this, both for the hostages and for the people of Gaza?
I think there is acute risk of mass deaths in famine if this situation continues and is cynically weaponized, as you said. For the hostages, I think Hamas has an interest in keeping them alive because they want to negotiate with Israel, and dead hostages are not a negotiating chip, to put it cynically. So they would be interested in providing minimum possible assistance, health-wise and nutrition-wise, to these hostages, and wait for the internal dynamic in Israel and US-Israel relations to evolve so that the negotiating position of Israel becomes a bit more soft.
Yes, Ambassador Sachdev, thank you very much. You are staying with us to discuss further updates. For our next story, we move over to North American diplomacy, where Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has expressed optimism that negotiations with the United States on trade could lead to a constructive outcome. Meanwhile, Canada's Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc referred to discussions with key US trade representatives, including Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Trade Representative Jameson Greer, as encouraging. The Trade Minister also noted that reducing some tariffs remains a viable option in the ongoing negotiations. Canada's Trade Minister also confirmed the likely talks between the Canadian Prime Minister and US President Donald Trump in the coming days after the US imposed a 35% tariff on goods not covered by the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Let's take a listen in to what the Canadian Prime Minister had to say.
Canada's strong. We can give ourselves far more than anyone can take away. We're building this great country. I just met with the Premier, building BC, building Canada, building in a Canadian way, building sustainably, building together, building positively, and that's what we're going to do. And yes, we will we'll come to something with the Americans, something constructive with the Americans.
We're once again joined by Ambassador Sachdev to discuss this ongoing relationship between the two North American countries. Ambassador Sachdev, Mark Carney, he campaigned in his election win on giving a harsh stance on Donald Trump. However, actions since then have led to a 35% tariff on Canadian goods coming into the United States. How significant here is Mark Carney's tone of optimism given this 35% tariff? Is this a strategic posture or sign of real progress behind the scenes?
Thank you. It's a complex issue once again, but let me put it in perspective. US and Canada are both each other's largest trading partners. 76% of Canadian exports go to United States. And United States depends on 16.8% of its imports from Canada. Having said that, I should also add that 90% of bilateral trade today between Canada and US is covered by US-Canada-Mexico trade agreement and is excluded from the tariffs. So only 10% of the bilateral trade is subject to new tariffs of 35% you mentioned. Of course, I should add that US has separate global tariffs on steel, aluminum, automobiles and auto parts, which apply to Canada, and Canada is a big supplier of auto parts to United States car industry in Detroit and elsewhere. So putting it all together, the rationale that the United States under Mr. Trump has used to impose 35% duties on remaining Canadian exports is that Canada is the source of fentanyl, the narcotic drug, and therefore, unless Canada does something to stop it altogether, they would impose the duties. Canada, on its side, claims that only 1% of fentanyl that enters the United States comes from Canada, and it has taken steps to curb that, appointing a drug czar and giving more powers and money to anti-narcotic agency, etc. Now, against this backdrop, the negotiations between ministers of the two sides have been ongoing. There have also been contacts with Mexico, who's also under Trump tariffs, but is also party to the three-part trade agreement in North America. So it is hoped that eventually the two sides would see through the negotiations and come to some kind of agreement which lowers tariffs from 35% to a reasonable level. I should also add that Trump has not been very popular in Canada by specifically and publicly arguing for Canada to merge with the United States as 51st state. During a previous administration's time in Canada and the current one, this offer has bristled Canadians of all hue.
Yes.
And that needs also to be ameliorated. So let's see how does it pan out. But short-term possibilities, despite optimistic tone of the Canadian leadership, is a bit scarce commodity.
Yes, thank you very much, Ambassador Sachdev. We now move on to another North American development. Finance Minister Francois Philippe Champagne and Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand are in Mexico City this week for high-level bilateral talks with senior Mexican officials, including President Claudia Sheinbaum. The meetings comes just days after both Canada and Mexico missed an August the 1st deadline to finalise updated trade deals with the United States under President Donald Trump's latest trade push. While Mexico secured a 90-day extension to continue negotiations without facing increased tariffs, Canada saw its tariffs on certain exports rise to 35% from 25%, following a breakdown in talks with Washington. The two-day talks in Mexico are expected to focus on deepening trade ties with coordinating approaches to the Trump administration. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is expected to speak with President Trump soon, according to Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who added that recent conversations with US officials have shown encouraging signs, though a short-term deal remains unlikely. We are once again joined by Ambassador Sachdev to discuss this further. Both of the United States' closest trading partners, Mexico and Canada, missed the 90-day deadline, the August the 1st deadline that Washington gave them, Ambassador Sachdev. They both are in very different situations. Mexico secured a 90-day extensions. However, Canada is expected to be hit with a 35% tariff. Why do you think Washington granted Mexico time, but not Canada?
It's a good question. Trump presidency has been full of such erratic decisions. But let me try and put some perspective to it. Mexico has different set of problems with the United States. Illegal immigration is the biggest one, where Mexico seemed to have pleased Trump by undertaking a very solid anti-illegal immigration program, and the flow has dropped. The return of the immigrants has been facilitated by Mexico. Secondly, I think Mexico has a huge advantage in terms of lower wages vis-a-vis United States, and the semi-finished goods that Mexico can supply to industries in the United States gives it a big leverage.
Yes.
United States, particularly southern United States, would be the industries would suffer if higher tariffs are imposed on imports from Mexico. So that is another reason. Petroleum is Mexico's main export, and that is also where American companies are involved. And America receives the crude and refines it and sells it off to Europe and elsewhere. So all these things make Mexico slightly better disposed in Mr. Trump's eyes.
Yes.
Yes,
thank you very much, Ambassador Sachdev, for joining us here on the programme. We now move over to the Indo-Pacific, where Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba says the government is ready to compile an extra budget to cushion the economy from the shock of US tariffs, especially on automobiles, raising concern that more debt may be required to fund the recovery. This announcement follows last month's upper house election defeat, which reduced Ishiba's ruling coalition to a minority. If approved, the supplementary budget, expected to total around 10 trillion yen, would be submitted to an extraordinary September Parliament session. It would be added on top of Japan's record 115.5 trillion yen annual budget, 24.5% of which is already spent servicing debt. Ishiba has rejected immediate cuts to Japan's 10% sales tax, citing its role in funding social welfare for the country's rapidly aging population. Japan's public debt now sits roughly at 250% of GDP, the highest among major economies. We're now joined by our guest, Dr. Satoru Nagao, to discuss these developments in Japan. He joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Dr. Nagao, for joining us. Prime Minister Ishiba's government is considering a 10 trillion yen stimulus to offset the impact of US tariffs, particularly on automobiles. How much of a lifeline could this budget provide, and what are its potential pitfalls?
This is a budget to protect Japan's industry, even if they're under paying the high tariff when they export to the United States. Because the United States is main market for the Japanese industry, especially the car industry is a rare industry Japan has kept at the top level in the world. In the past, there are many industries Japan has at the top level in the world, but now car or some other anime, or these are the exceptional industry for Japan to lead the world market. So that's why Japan want to maintain this market in the United States. So that's why the Japanese government prepares a big budget to maintain the industry. And but good news is because of the agreement between Japan and the United States, the number is already fixed. So this means that they can calculate, Japanese government can calculate how much money they will lose to pay the tariff. So that's why how much money the government should prepare to support this car industry or other industry which need to pay the tariff when they export to the United States. So that's why now they can identify the plan, and the next step is how to implement it.
Yes, Dr. Nagao, thank you very much for joining us and giving us some insight on that situation in Tokyo. We now move on once again to the United States, where White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller has accused India of helping finance Russian forces by continuing to purchase oil from Moscow. Speaking on Fox News, Miller said the following.
For India to continue financing this war by purchasing the oil from Russia. People will be shocked to learn that India is basically tied with China in purchasing Russian oil. That's an astonishing fact. India portrays itself as being one of our closest friends in the world. So President Trump, look, he wants a tremendous relationship and has had always a tremendous relationship with India and the Prime Minister. But we need to get real about dealing with the financing of this war. So President Trump, all options are on the table to deal diplomatically, financially, and otherwise with the ongoing war in Ukraine so we can achieve peace and end the war that the Democrat Party and Joe Biden are responsible for.
The comments mark one of the sharpest critiques of India made by the Trump administration. A 25% tariff on Indian products took effect on Friday, with Trump also threatening 100% tariffs on imports from countries that continue buying Russian oil unless a ceasefire is reached. Despite this, Indian officials say they will maintain energy ties with Moscow. We're now joined by Gautam Mukherjee, who's a senior journalist. He joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Gautam, for joining us on this. What are your thoughts of Stephen Miller's comments here, also the Indian reaction? Do you think India should stop buying Russian oil in order to appease the American president and avoid a possible 100% tariff from the United States?
Absolutely not. Mr. Miller, this is propaganda out and out. Yes, we are buying Russian oil because it's cheaper. If America offered us oil cheaper than Russia, we would buy. In fact, we are buying some amount of oil and gas from the United States and from a variety of other countries in addition to Russia. Our needs are 80% of, all our needs are imported. And this percentage masks the fact that every month, every year, the actual volume of oil that we need is growing. Now, on the other side of the coin is the fact that we also have some of the largest oil refineries in the world, the most modern, and we export a lot of the oil that we import from various sources, including Russia, back to America and Europe, and they're very happy to buy it. So, to say that we are financing the Russian war against Ukraine is a bit of a stretch. And coming from the Deputy Chief of Staff, it smacks of utter propaganda.
Okay.
And we are not listening to this nonsense.
Okay, Gautam, do you think that India's policy of strategic autonomy here has backfired on itself? There has been some critiques of, obviously, the Indian government's closeness with Moscow, along with maintaining good relations with the West. What's your analysis of that, Gautam?
Well, our strategic autonomy is not new and will continue. What is glaring and probably part of these wild statements is the fact that America has had absolutely no influence either on Ukraine or in Russia in order to stop this war. They are carrying on and on. Russia is bashing up Ukraine at will, and Ukraine is using NATO armaments to do likewise. Now, Trump's efforts have been totally, useless in all of this, and he continues to finance the war of Ukraine, continues to sell them armaments either directly or via NATO. So what's he getting agitated with us for? It is his utter failure.
Yes, Gautam Mukherjee, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure to have you as always. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.